When Haidt says that humans are selfish, he's affirming at least a weak version of the psychological egoism thesis. Remember, this is a descriptive thesis, claiming that humans tend to seek their own self-interest. This differs from the ethical egoism thesis that claims that humans ought to seek their own self-interest. Haidt's claim about groupishness goes beyond this. This is the claim that self-interest is not necessarily individual self-interest. As humans, we take ourselves to be part of a group, part of groups. Most immediately, we're part of a family, then part of a community, and so on. Similar to how, when in competition with individuals, we seek our own win, when our group is in competition with other groups, we seek our group's win. Underlying both of these is the assumption that there is competition. This might be ritualized competition like we see in sporting events. More often through history, it's been competition for scarce resources. We now encounter the third principle of moral psychology. Remember the first principle? The first principle of moral psychology is that intuitions, our gut reactions, come first. Strategic reasoning comes second. This is the formal way of talking about the elephant and rider metaphor. The elephant, the powerful and large animal, is our intuitions, our gut reactions. The rider, the small figure that tries guiding the elephant in a productive way, that's our reasoning, our offering of justifications. What about the second principle? Second principle of moral psychology for Haidt is that morality is about more than issues of harm and fairness. We saw that weird cultures have been tempted to miss this. Now we get the third principle. Morality binds and blinds. Morality functions to bind us together with others in our group as we together compete in the world. If you're like me, you may find some of this confusing. After all, this is not the first time we've heard this principle. Been hearing it for a while. What is new is that now with the discussion of groupishness, we're making sense of what he means by binding. Haidt talks about the free rider problem in terms of Darwin's discussion of multi-level selection. Haidt says, when groups compete, the cohesive cooperative group usually wins. But within each group, selfish individuals, free riders, come out ahead. They share in the group's gains while contributing little to its efforts. The bravest army wins, but within the bravest army, the few cowards who hang back are the most likely of all to survive the fight, go home and become fathers. Since this is a college class, let's try an example from education. Have you ever had to do a group project? Sure, education is different. Well, in warfare, it's usually a matter of winning or losing. In a class, it's theoretically possible for every group to win. Who do you want in your group? Do you want free riders? People who think you're awesomely intelligent and hardworking and will carry the load for them? Or do you want people who sacrifice themselves, work hard, and lead the group to success? Each of you has a limited amount of time and resources. Each of you has other demands in your life. Each of you are tempted to short the group so that you can reserve yourself for other demands. Groups do best when individual contribution and self-denial is maximized. Individuals think they do best when their group wins, but when their own outlay is minimized. Our groups are built around our understanding of members as people like us. The more we perceive a person to be like us, the more likely we are to extend trust. On the other side, the more we perceive people or other groups to not be like us, the less likely we are to trust them. How do we decide who is like us? Well, it's natural to think family members are like us. It's also been natural, at least for the past few centuries, to think along racial terms. People of my race are like me. People of other races, well, they're not like me. The picture on the slide, you see me with my twin, James Otieno. Do you notice the similarities? We both wore white shirts that day, along with our Bob the Tomato VeggieTales ties. We both had on our purple lanyards. So just going by looks, James must be like me, right? But there's more. James and I were both on faculty at the same time, at the same college. We were members of the same department. We taught some of the same classes. So James is like me, right? But there's more. We also shared a commitment to Christ. Both of us were Jesus followers. In fact, both of us had at various times served as pastors, and we both lived in Texas. What more could I look for in trying to find somebody who is like me? Haidt talks about self-domestication in this context. This is looking for people who are like us in sharing a moral matrix, in looking at the world similarly, and in taking up a common enterprise. Through this joining together in groups, we humans become less wild, less aggressive, less just out for me. Haidt examines how we normally individualistic humans can become attuned to living in a hive, how we become groupish. He calls it the Hive Hypothesis. It may be that individualism and an inclination to pursue our self-interest comes most naturally to us. Psychological egoism may be mostly true about us, or true about us most of the time. But it's not the only truth about us. There are conditions under which we humans shift away from being purely self-interested. There are conditions when we transcend individual self-interest and think and act in terms of group interest. In these conditions, we move from I to we. Haidt sees an advantage in creating hive-ish organizations. These might be corporations, work teams, military units, political parties, or other kinds of purposive groups. There are three ways to increase hivishness in organizations. The first way is to increase similarity among the members. If you've been paying attention, this strategy cuts against the grain of our current American ethos, at least officially. We prefer diversity over similarity. There are several reasons for preferring an emphasis on diversity. First, we've seen too many adverse side effects of toxic hivishness. We've seen persecution, denial of civil rights, and even violence directed at those outside the group. Second, we are a diverse society. We have a wide range of ethnicities and ideologies living close to each other. Societal tranquility depends on diverse groups getting along. Third, there are some of us who think diversity is more interesting than similarity. Years ago, I worked in a multicultural church in Houston. In our membership, we had not just Caucasian Americans like me, we also had African Americans, Africans from several countries in Africa, some families from Asia, people of Hispanic origin, and even a few Europeans. I don't remember having anybody from Antarctica. It was a fun place to be. When I moved next to pastor a church in small town East Texas, it seemed sort of boring. But what does it mean to be similar? Our current fixation is on ethnic and gender similarity. We didn't have that so much at our church in Houston. What we did have was a few other kinds of similarity. Not only did we live in the same neighborhoods, but we were all highly educated, middle-class Christians. Our points of origin may have varied greatly. The kind of life we'd been socialized into was very much alike. Increasing similarity, whatever we mean by that, increases the likelihood of flipping the hive switch, of moving our feeling from I to we. The second way to build hivishness in an organization is to exploit synchrony, doing the same thing together. It helps if the same thing we do is something that takes our total attention. If it involves us in our minds, our bodies, and our emotions, that makes hivishness more likely. A third producer of hivishness is arranging competition among teams. When we have an organization, we don't pit individuals against each other. We pit groups against other groups. Sharing mutual stress in this setting leads us to stronger experiences of we over I. In the 1990s, Robert Putnam wrote the book Bowling Alone, introducing the concept of social capital to the broader population. There are two major types of social capital. There's bonding social capital and bridging social capital. Both kinds of social capital are necessary in a healthy society. Bonding social capital, Putnam likes to sociological superglue. It reinforces exclusive identities, making us into what is clearly this hive and not some other. If bonding social capital is sort of superglue, bridging social capital, according to Putnam, is a kind of sociological WD-40. Bridging social capital functions to cross boundaries and bring people into the group. Putnam's book was about the decline of social capital in America over the past few decades. This is why I used the title Bowling Alone. Back when social capital was high, on his account, Americans bowled together in leagues. Nowadays, leagues have mostly died out, and people bowl alone. Social capital can not only decline, it can also increase to an unhealthy level. When bonding social capital creates excessive hivishness, we end up with political movements like fascism. For these groups, the in-group is everything. The out-group is bad, even evil. The out-group needs to be destroyed or killed. Though the terminology, social capital, hivishness, fascism, all those are of recent vintage, the concept is ancient. Ibn Khaldun, a Muslim scholar of the medieval era, wrote of what he called asabiya, which is roughly equivalent to Putnam's bonding social capital and the hivishness it produces. In his analysis of Islamic terrorist groups, scholar Akbar Ahmed took up Ibn Khaldun's work and writes about hyper asabiya. This is the extreme groupishness that he sees in the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and their like. In theory, America can be seen as a nation of hives. We see this idea developed as early as the first half of the 19th century in Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. He was greatly impressed by the role of voluntary associations that he saw as he toured America. He saw the power of both bonding and bridging social capital at that time. A healthy political system requires, it would seem, both strong groupishness, strong hives, and a willingness to compete with other tribes without destroying them. In our current era of increasing tribalism in politics, one thing that might help to have our tribes, our hives, increase their use of bridging social capital to look for more ways to bring outsiders in rather than to focus solely on maintaining their own purity. Here we are at the end, and Haidt finally gives us his definition of morality. This isn't the definition of morality. This is the definition he's been working toward. Some of you may have become impatient, wondering if he'd ever get around to defining the subject he claims to have been discussing all along. Personally, I like this approach. I find it especially helpful when the concept at hand is one that most ordinary people already assume they understand. In philosophy and other fields of academic inquiry, it is quite common to spend much of one's work clearing the ground or dealing with misconceptions before developing a positive case. We see how Haidt is offering a descriptive definition of morality. If you've been paying attention, this is not a surprise. We've been pointing at this feature of his work all along. As a Durkheimian, That is, as one who follows the work of sociologist Emil Durkheim, Haidt is more interested in the communal aspect of morality. So we see that his definition of morality as a system or set of systems. He says, moral systems are interlocking sets of values, virtues, norms, practices, identities, institutions, technologies, and evolved psychological mechanisms that work together to suppress or regulate self-interest and make cooperative societies possible. Notice that this is what he calls a functionalist definition. You can see this clearly when you consider the structure of the definition. We see a list of things and then claim that these work together. They have a function. The first function they have is controlling self-interest, which is a given for all us individualist humans. The second function is making cooperative societies possible. That is moving us beyond ourselves and creating hivishness. We want cooperative societies, then we need moral systems. At this point, Haidt's inclination toward utilitarianism comes into tension with his Durkheimianism. He thinks utilitarians need to learn from Durkheim and set aside the pure individualism that is so common to the utilitarian tradition. If human flourishing is really going to happen, we need the groupishness and the awareness of that groupishness that the Durkheimian approach gives us.